That's awesome. So thanks for taking some time today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you guys. This is great.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what a service programming director does? I know you have a wide range of responsibilities, and so you're probably so busy, but tell everybody a little bit about what that does and how it relates to Sunday.
Right. Our service programming directors oversee our adult worship services. So that's everything from our guest services team out in the parking lot and our ushers to what happens within the program. So it's our programming staff, our production team, our music, and our media team. So there's basically 5 teams that I work with to pull off Sundays, Sunday morning, Sunday evening. So yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
the overview of it all.
So you get to work with everybody from musicians to like parking
Right,
guys and
right,
parking
right.
gals.
Yeah, I've got the creatives, and then you switch your brain real quick and go over to production mode and try to understand the intricacies of all that. So you wear many hats on a Sunday.
Yeah, so all you preaching rocket pastors can probably relate. You know, you're like preaching the message and then like counting the money or something afterwards.
Right,
You know?
exactly.
Dealing with accountants.
Exactly.
So we are talking this month, Lauren, about planning a calendar a year. And one of the
Right,
reasons I
right.
want to talk to you guys is, and you specifically, is because you guys are so good at just kind of having a framework for where you're going for the year. And we're really coaching. We've spent a couple months talking to our Preaching Rocket members about, how to get a week ahead, how to get a month ahead. And this month we're talking about doing the annual plan, which is really overwhelming it could be
Yeah.
overwhelming for a lot of people. But you guys do that really well. Can you talk a little bit about just from your perspective as to the benefits of like since you help plan and program the service, you know what the
Right,
topics are going to be about. So does that
right.
help you?
Absolutely. We actually go off for a day and plan what the year's going to look like, and we have a example of that on our website inside northpoint.org. So I mean, if you guys ever want to check that out, but basically we have series that we go ahead and try to plan out, figure out for our yearly calendar, and then we break it down into kind of a monthly meeting that we have to discuss. Okay, here's this series coming up. So I can walk y'all through that whole process. It's been a huge help for us, not only to get ahead and to plan where the year's going, but I think it's really created an accountability system within the infrastructure to figure out, okay, we need to be ahead of where we're going and planning for that from our vantage point. So I can dive into how our system works with that if that would help.
Yeah, do an overview. Jeff and I talked a little bit
Yeah,
about the annual deal of like how the day works and who should be
right.
there. But I would be real interested to hear your take on what happens from the big perspective to like getting it down to
Yeah.
Sunday.
Absolutely. So, one of the terms we talk about all the time is narrowing the focus. That we always need to be, cutting away in essence to get where we're going. So, we meet a year out, and that's great. But oftentimes we're like, now, what was that series in October? So about 6 weeks ahead of time, before the series is planned to start, we go ahead and meet as a team and talk about, all right, this is where we're headed for the series. It's not necessarily a bottom line as much as it's like, this is the main takeaway we want people to go away with. And so we figure out what that is as a creative planning team alongside our communicators 6 weeks out. And then at that point, it's kind of the creative license to say, all right, now that we know where we're going, let's give this to our programming teams and create a program around that. So 6 weeks is really our mile marker to say we've got to have a direction 6 weeks out for a series.
So
Um,
the big picture is a year out. You do that once a year, but then you really
right.
start working on it 6 weeks out.
Exactly. And at that point, the communicator honestly kind of goes away from the process in essence and starts working on their talks. And because we have a takeaway, a bottom line of where the series is going, then we get to go be creative and plan a service around it. So that's kind of where the team splits ways. Communicators go this way, we go this way. And then every week we have a creative planning meeting. So we're working on different series in that meeting at the same time, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah.
so that's kind of our overview of it. And we have a weekly meeting with our communicators. We have a weekly with Andy, or like if Jeff is speaking, I'll have a weekly with him. And so in those meetings, we're giving updates of here's where we're going, just to make sure that we're still tracking with where the content is headed. But
Yeah,
that
that's
6 week
great.
marker is really important for us to plan how we want the service to go.
I think the idea of, I don't know if it's a revolutionary idea, it might be to some, the idea of the communicator, the speaker, the pastor not being in that process for those whole times and just driving the whole thing. You guys have really sensed the benefit of saying, work on the message over here, we'll do it, and then we'll bring it back together.
Right.
So does that work? Was that a hard adjustment? Is that worth it?
I mean, honestly, I would say it's a huge value for us. And Andy really led out in this by saying, Julie Arnold, who does my position but multi-campus wide for all of our campuses, she oversees it. And in our weekly meeting with Andy, all of our SBD directors, my role, service programming directors, meet with Andy alongside Julie. And it's really Julie in our meeting, in essence, to lead. It's she leads that meeting. Andy doesn't lead it. So she's asking him for content. She's the one, that's building that infrastructure. And it's neat to watch Andy sit back and say, I trust y'all, go do it. And as a young leader coming into the organization, it just showed me a picture of what could be and just being entrusted to oversee a service, So that's been a huge value for us. And honestly, as a pastor, you don't have time to do all the things that we need to focus on. So it takes them out of the fray of having to deal with all these minutia details, and allows them to really do what they do best, which is preach great messages,
I think that's so encouraging. And so I know for, you guys as Preaching Rocket members, that it's okay to be in a meeting and not lead it. And, that may be hard for some people to do, but you really can empower. I mean, I think you guys have been empowered to do things that you would not have done had, the senior pastor always been in the meeting and directing everything.
Absolutely.
So Jeff and I talked a little bit with our team, the Preaching Rocket members, about just how that annual process works and who should be in the room and all that stuff. And we talked about some ideas of like who can come to that annual meeting.
Right.
Where there's planning. And so we said, if you don't have a big team, that's okay. There's volunteers that could come, Christians, non-Christians. We even did a meeting one time where we invited just a pastor friend to come who had no stake in anything, but was like just had great perspective.
Right.
And so have you guys seen a benefit from having some diversity in that idea process?
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to our series planning, when that 6-week out part, we bring in tons of different people, and we did a series called Sex, Love, and Dating, and actually created about 15 people in the room that are young singles, older singles in Buckhead, because Andy's about to talk to a huge group about, sex, love, and dating. And he's like, I've been out of this world for so long, And so it was really neat to watch him say, I'm going to surround myself with people who are actually in this world, because I don't want to speak from a place of knowledge where I haven't been in a while, So we create a forum for about 10 to 15 people to come around a circle and just say, hey, what's it like? What are the issues? What's the key terms that you guys are using these days that we haven't used, So that's been a huge help for us, regardless of where your series is, to surround yourself with people who are actually living in that, instead of just what we experience day in, day out.
That's really good. And so, because, a pastor may be an expert at what the Bible has to say on the thing, but, the longer we go, the more disconnected we can get from, like, the people sitting in the chairs and the pews or whatever they are.
Right. And, one other thing that's been really great, too, and I think Jeff models this well because we work so closely together, he'll spend a lot of time with me or somebody else just throwing his sermons at us and letting us give feedback. And what happens in that moment is, first of all, just gender differences. I'll be able to say that doesn't register as a woman, or that's not funny, or, that kind of stuff. Or, what, this could be improved by saying this, because in your train of thought, you've lived with this message for a couple of weeks, but I don't have cursive knowledge. This is my first time hearing it. And to me, I don't understand where you're going. And so I think surrounding yourself with a few voices that are saying, hey, I haven't been living with this, explain that to me, has been really helpful in any communicator forming their messages.
Yeah, you said a phrase that I know exactly what you meant, but I think it's really, really strong, the cursive knowledge.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that for a minute? Because I think a lot of pastors struggle with that.
Yeah, I think any communicator, pastor, you live with a message. Oftentimes you've had that burden for a message for weeks, months at a time. And so by the time you start forming it, it's so formulated in your brain, that you're like, everyone's going to be tracking with me. But the reality is we have people coming to our churches for the first time, or maybe they've even been there for years, but they don't know where you're going. And that curse of knowledge of knowing something that nobody else in the room knows creates and informs your decision making, and honestly your preaching and communication style. And so for us, it's so great to surround ourselves with people who haven't been living in it, who don't have that knowledge, and who can say, I'm not tracking with you, and you need to create a transition sentence, a little bit more verbiage around this to help us know where you're taking us.
That's really good. I think one of the things I'm so impressed by, just from what I know and just working with you guys a little bit, is how secure people have to be in order to ask for feedback.
Right,
and to, like you mentioned, Jeff, just, pitching a sermon idea. And then being willing to hear, man, that wasn't funny. I mean, that's like, I think a lot of people could get real, like, who are you kind of thing. So, but I sense a lot of security from you guys. I think that's important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at Andy, you look at Jeff, I mean, they're incredible communicators. I mean, why would Andy even need to surround himself with somebody? But I think the thing that makes him go way further than most communicators is he surrounds himself with people that are, learning from him to say, help me understand this better. What are you thinking? And just his humility, I think God has really allowed that to let him go further. I think he's, God's done that with Jeff as well. And just, I think we put a lid on our influence and honestly, any ability and talent we have when we say, no, I'm just going to keep this to myself. As scripture says, advisors allow us to go further, faster, surrounding ourselves with that. And I just think the men and women in our organization that allow people to give us feedback and influence just make us better communicators and better leaders, And so I think that's something we really value at North Point. And yeah, you do have to have thick skin. All of us as communicators have to have thick skin. But it makes us better. And you know what? It takes the focus off of us and what I'm trying to communicate or, and how I want to share it. And it really puts it back on our audience, who are really the people we're trying to reach. But let's be honest, sometimes in ministry, we forget who that person is. So.
And, listening to people and asking for feedback and all that stuff, it doesn't require a big staff or a big budget. It's like a lot of times I think I know I do this. I'm guilty of this. That I see what other people do, and I'm if I had all those resources, or if we had all those people. But we're talking about listening to somebody. We're talking about humility. That has nothing to do with, how many people are on the team, or all any of those kind of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me ask you one more question, because I think, man, you've hit some great stuff, and the last thing I want to say is, from your role, from your perspective, you've got the message and you've got the service. Yep. And 6 weeks out, you said you kind of start blending those together. Sometimes things fit really, really well together, and sometimes they don't. But you guys, when you're planning a service, you're looking at the whole deal. You're looking at the whole thing, what's happening, video, music, or whatever. Can you talk just for a minute about just flow, just flow, because a lot of times we got all right, we got 3 songs, we got this, we got that, may or may not work. Sometimes it works. Talk a little bit, because you're really good at that, about just flowing things together, going from one thing to the next, including the message, which is a big part of it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, this is a huge thing for us. We say all the time that we want to take people on a journey, and not in a manipulative way, but we really believe that we want to usher people through different segments. And so when we're creating that, again, it's so important that we actually meet with whoever's communicating to know where they're going, so that we begin planning with the end in mind, to say, okay, this is where Andy's taking people today. So let's actually start with our service, planning it, knowing that this is where we're going to end up taking people. So we plan with the end in mind. I think having that prep time allows us to create a system for our volunteers and staff members where they know what the win is in regards to a Sunday. They know where we're taking people, which is huge, because in our churches, as much as everybody else's, volunteers really do run the service. And if they don't have a clear picture of where we're taking people, then it's really hard for them to lead through the service, and be equipped to do what they're asked to do. So that meeting that we have is huge. And then from that meeting, from this time of conception to actual implementation, for us as a team, we just say, all right, this is where we're headed. Let's create a journey through that. And we start with a parking lot. Recently, we did a series called Climate Change, so we're like, how can we create this theme in the parking lot? So we had all of our guest services, volunteers, wear ponchos in the parking lot. So all of a sudden, you're driving on our campus and you're thinking, wow, something's different today, they walk in our services. We start with an opening song that kind of emphasizes the idea of where we're going. Our welcome person comes up, and we call this a welcome, honestly, because we don't feel like our job is to inform people at this point. You know, we have to win the right to be heard. So we want to welcome them to our services. So our welcome basically says, hey, here's where we're going today. You probably heard that fun opener. You know, let me bring you along with where we're headed. We give them an overview of what our services entail, always keeping in mind that first time guest. In our singing part, because we go basically to our worship part after that point, and during that, we start with just kind of a broad overview of this is what God says about himself, and then we narrow it down to talking about Jesus or sacrifice, because really for our first timer, we're thinking, wow, they haven't been introduced to this idea of Jesus. You know,
Yeah.
we're not going to just throw this in their face. So we journey them along through our worship sets. Even how we flow with our worship sets, we make sure it's one continual flow of basically a song, not just start, stop, because even that triggers people on the journey. And then, you know, we get into our message segment. But honestly, I think the hugest part for us is we have a run through ahead of time on a Sunday morning, and we practice transitions to a fault.
That's
because
good.
the thing that takes any of us away from a journey, whether it's at a concert, a program, is those transitions, those lag times that don't carry you to where we're going. So that's a huge part for us in creating a service. So the concept really comes to life in that rehearsal process, and in making those transitions just create a seamless movement for people that are attending our services. So that's a big deal for us.
Yeah, and you know, obviously, I think I know a little of the inside stuff, but I also sit in a service. I mean, I
Right.
attend, my family attends, and so we see, you know, even though we may know some of the behind the scenes stuff, we still are engaged to those things. And one of the things it's such a small thing, but the way you called it, the welcome, is done. So a lot of times, whoever's doing the welcome will say, hey, we're going to be here for about an hour. Hey, we're going to sing 3 songs. You know, or whatever. And I'm thinking if I'm just an unchurched guy, knowing that this thing is an hour is really good. Like it's not an unending thing.
Right,
And it's
right.
It's like the tour guide, but it's helpful stuff that I want to hear, you know?
Right.
So that's really good. You guys do a great job with that.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a huge part to my role specifically, because in most churches, you know, you've got a music director or a worship director, and kind of going back to your staffing question earlier, my job is to oversee that whole service, you know. So if I'm the worship director and that's my job is to oversee the service, my whole focus is going to be on worship, you know, and how the music's going and all of that. So my job is to wear multiple hats, to be the diplomat in a lot of situations, and to create a flow where I'm not biased to one part. I'm not biased to lighting or production or music. It's to oversee the whole process from a guest experience.
That's really good.
You know, early when North Point started, you know, Julie was hired to be the service programming director, you know, but we didn't have a music guy necessarily or a production guy. Those were all volunteer positions, and she would meet with them on a Thursday night and just buy them dinner and talk through that. So I think for churches that don't have that kind of staff, this role, and I'm not just saying that because I feel it, but it's just such an imperative role, because as a pastor, you need your talk set up well. You know, you want people to be in a place where they're leaning in to listen to that message. And so I think that role is so important to oversee the whole guest experience than to just be specifically gifted in one area, you know? So
somebody's got to care about the whole thing.
The whole thing. And you can't, as a pastor, you've got to care about your message. You know?
If we
so
let the pastors be the whole thing, it'd be like an hour of preaching. If the music guys did, it'd be like 22 songs.
Exactly.
Lighting guys would be having like laser lights and smoke going all over.
Exactly.
So you just bring it all together.
Bring it all together. Try.
Yeah, that's so good. Hey, listen, thank you so much for taking some time. We're serving so many pastors that, you know, maybe they are doing 4 or 5 different things like you are, and I think just a couple of the ideas that you shared in here were just fantastic. Give that website one more time. You guys put a ton of stuff up on the Insider website.
Yeah, InsideNorthPoint.org. It's under service programming, and there's a bunch of things that you can download there, from our yearly calendar to org charts to job descriptions, etc. So there's a lot of things on that website that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and so I really do encourage you guys to check that out. Thank you, Lauren, so much for taking time. It's been awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for what you do.